I'm going to make an argument that facts are stories. What is a story? A story accomplishes a couple of things. One, it prioritizes information. Prioritizes. The story is like a prioritization algorithm. By telling a story, you are asserting what from the circumstances is important and what is not. What context to include and what context to omit. By telling a story, you are acting as a curator. You are prioritizing the information that is there, that is shared. For example, you could tell the story of the United States of America in the traditional way. Pilgrims come over from Europe, they set up colonies, George Washington wins the Revolutionary War, yada, 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 here we are. Or you can tell the story that the Indians were just here minding our business, some barbarous foreigners came in, stole their land, set up their own government, and went at them for 300 years. Both things are using the information that is shared by the situation. That you could easily argue that happened. You could also easily argue that the traditional version happened. So what we do when we tell a story is we're emphasizing certain parts and de-emphasizing other parts. We are acting as arbiters of truth in a way just by telling a story because we are asserting priorities. Now what's interesting about this assertion of priorities is that priorities is kind of another term for morals. A story sort of moralizes. If you're asserting that one thing is more important than another, then you're asserting that it's worth trading for another. If I'm hungry, just in an ordinary way, I'm hungry, I want some lunch. I'm walking down the street, I see someone walking this way holding a cheeseburger. I could be a thief and take his cheeseburger, or I could control that impulse and just walk on past. And so I face a choice. Do I value that cheeseburger more, or do I value having the instant gratification, and I devalue whether I am innocent of being a thief? And I choose to be a thief. I trade my innocence for this cheeseburger. That is a value decision. It's a moral decision, but it's a decision about priorities. It's a decision about what is more important. And since a story is an assertion of something more important, it is an assertion of moralities. It is saying, in the traditional version, it's more important to remember that George Washington fought the Revolutionary War, or if you're telling the Indian victimhood version, you are asserting that it's more important that the Indians were victimized. And each one kind of comes with a morality. The first one says you should imitate George Washington and be a humble hero who sets up a government and wins a war, blah, blah, blah. Great. Or you can assert something else. It's more important to avoid victimizing anybody, which is also very important. It's different sort of assertions about morality. Why is this important for facts? Because as I wrote in Ribbon Farm, a bit clumsily a couple of years ago, a fact is not merely an observation. We all share circumstances about the world. We can all observe things kind of equally well, for better or for worse. If you were punched in the face yesterday, you either were or you weren't. There's an objective observation that you can make. There's an objective fact that you can assert or deny. So facts do have that observational element, but what I pointed out in Ribbon Farm a couple of years ago was that there's not only observation, there's also decisions about context, specifically which context to omit versus include. Because, for example, I could say I was punched in the face yesterday and it was 78 degrees in Guam. What does the temperature in Guam have to do with the fact that I was punched yesterday? Well, probably not that much, but it is a fact, and when I tell you that I was punched in the face yesterday, which is not true, by the way, it's just an example, I am deciding what is relevant and what is not. I'm deciding what to omit and what to include. Another example is that Neil deGrasse Tyson was very famously saying there are no UFOs. It's just like natural phenomena, things being mistaken for other things. But as has been receiving more attention in the press lately, there really are unexplainable phenomena by science that is public knowledge and by natural phenomena that really constitutes something that could be alien spacecraft is one of the very viable hypotheses. And there's been evidence of that for a long time. So the fact that Neil deGrasse Tyson chose to omit that is a decision that he made as a storyteller under the guise of being a fact promoter or something like that. So when we state a fact, like I was punched in the face yesterday, in the same way that a story prioritizes things, like basically these two functions are the same, is the point that I'm trying to make. That when I state a fact, I'm deciding what to omit and include, what's important and what's not important, which is the same thing as prioritizing, deciding what's important and what's not important. So what does this have to do with anything? It's that a story does something else that a fact does not. This is why I think a story is a more important epistemic building block than a fact. It's more important to think of the world as a collection of stories, or reality as a story, than a collection of facts. And here's why. Here's what stories do that facts do not do. A story, to a greater or lesser extent, allows or forbids things to be as they are. What do I mean by that? G.K. Chesterton tells an example of an insane person. He says an insane person is not really missing any facts, for example. He lives in the same world and can make the same observation as anybody else. The example he uses is a paranoid person who thinks that everybody's out to get him. And he can go to the store just like everybody else and see the grocery man stocking the shelves. But where for us, it'll be a grocery man stocking the shelves, he will think, oh, this guy is a spy sent there by the agencies to make sure that they know where I am at all times because they're out to get me. Or if he goes to McDonald's and buys a burger and they ask for his credit card, he goes, oh, they're not just getting my credit card, they're getting my personal information so they can report me to the secret agencies that are out to get me. So all the same information that you or I may get from the world, the insane person also gets, the paranoiac also gets, but it is filtered through a story that prioritizes things incorrectly in a very small way that limits, that forbids things to be as they are. He does not allow the grocery man to just be a grocery man. His story forces all of the same input that you or I receive into this set of priorities that is just about the situation that people are about to get him. This means also that sheer intellect or reason cannot get him out of it, because he's going to keep reasoning himself in this circle. His reason is going to reinforce the story. It also means, for the most part, input from the outside, circumstances, information, events cannot really change his story either, because they are going to be coded, prioritized in this way to assert the story that he is just the victim of all this persecution, everyone's out to get him. And so what has to happen is, since his reason, rationality, and thinking isn't going to help, and external circumstances isn't going to help, and new information isn't going to help, well, what can he do? What happens is he needs to have an act of will. He needs to make an act of will. And the act of will is to jump, per se, is to dare to believe a different story. And it's a sheer act of will. You might also call it a leap of faith, in the sense that this is just a jump. It is not an exercise of the rational faculties. It is really an exercise of the will. I choose, I dare, I even force myself in a certain sense to believe this other thing which does not seem apparent from my current position, so that from within this other story I can look around and see the extent to which it allows or forbids things to be as they are, and see if it's better than where I currently am. So you can call this an act of will, you can call this an act of faith, but one thing is definitely not is an act of reason, an act of reasoning, an act of education. It's not a mental process, it's a will emotional process. So then perhaps, let's say, he becomes mostly cured of his paranoia, but now he just doesn't trust cops. So he can see the grocery man and go, oh, okay, that's just a grocery man. He can go buy a burger at McDonald's and go, oh, that guy just wants my credit card so that I can buy a burger. But then maybe he'll just see a cop and go, oh, that guy's out to get me. He's just gonna report me to the agencies, blah, blah, blah. You can see that this bigger story, while not perhaps perfect, allows more things to be as they are. And therefore, his priorities are going to be better because they are no longer inappropriately protecting himself from a persecution that doesn't exist. And he's more able to accurately interact with the world. Now, we are all in this exact predicament. To a greater or lesser degree, we believe some story that our reason reinforces and cannot by itself get us out of. And that story that we believe prioritizes things in a certain way and therefore moralizes things in a certain way. And so to the extent that we have an accurate story about the world, we will prioritize and have a sense of morality that to a greater or lesser extent allows things to be as they are. This is why it's important to believe the right stories about the world more than the right facts about the world. Because a fact really is by itself a story, but it is a story that pretends not to be a story. And it is a story that pretends not to have a set of priorities and therefore a set of moral assertions baked into it. Does that make sense? A fact is a story, but a story is a better way to think about a fact because a story admits that it makes choices of priorities and morals, whereas a fact thinks it claims to merely be an observation. If I'm just stating the fact, sir, then I am innocent of all error and perfectly moral, and you are evil if you disagree with me. But if I am asserting a story, that story has morals baked into it, and if my beliefs, actions, and the results therefore speak to a more harmonious reality or create a more harmonious reality, then that is a much more robust proof of the truth of something than merely stating it while wearing a suit in a nice newsroom studio or something like that. So I hope that makes sense. This is how I would update the Ribbon Farm post from a couple years ago. Instead of saying that facts are mere judgment calls, which like they are, the way in which they're judgment calls is actually pretty much identical to the way stories are judgment calls. And the reason that stories are important is that they have morals baked into them. So the story that we believe about the world ends up being our morality. And that's why it's so important to believe the right story and to investigate and see what the right story might be. Because from our current perspective of the insane man, we can only see the story that we can see. And it takes non-rational action. It takes acts of will. It takes acts of faith, things that have nothing to do with thinking or reasoning, to explore and see what else might be out there that might be superior, that might reveal more of reality, that might allow more of reality to be what it is for us instead of forcing itself to be omitted. That's a good example. All right, so I mentioned Neil deGrasse Tyson's thing about aliens earlier. So if Neil deGrasse Tyson's story about UFOs is right here, then basically what he has done is he's taken the last 50 to 70 to 1,000 years of research on UFOs and just set it over here and omitted it, decided that it doesn't matter. So he's got this story that says, there's lots of things that seem to be flying around maybe, but there's no evidence that there's alien spacecraft when there's actually abundant evidence. So he tells this story, but it forbids all this research over here from being what it is. He does not have a place for it in here. Or he might say it's just made up, which when you examine that, makes no sense. So this is how, when we have a story, we can observe it, allowing and forbidding things to be as they are. I hope this makes some sense. Where am I going with this? The last thing that's very important. This is the kill shot right here. Okay. Here's the thing. There's a lot of debate about morality these days. There's sort of like this postmodern idea that there's no objective morality. It just comes down to like culture or personal preference. There's no correct morality. There's no correct value judgments out there in the world. I, of course, as a Catholic, think that's false. But here's one of the reasons why. That there are a lot of people arguing on my side. There's a lot of people arguing that there is an objective morality, and I think that's the intuitive conclusion. Because even if I say I don't believe in objective morality, and yet I morally persecute somebody else, well, by what standard am I doing that? Like, I'm implying by condemning anybody that I believe there is some standard there by which they may be condemned. Okay, I've been rambling long enough. Here's the exciting part. If you believe in an objective morality means there is an objective story. Woo! A story is a morality. If there's an objective morality, there is an objective story. So now the quest becomes, if you believe there's an objective morality, which is probably you if you're watching this video, the question then is, what is the objective story? The quest begins. You no longer have to settle for a wishy-washy, well, I think it's that, and you think it's that, and they think it's this, and we'll just let everybody get along. Like, that's nice for a while. That's nice for like an adolescent philosophy. But if we want to become adults and realize the fullness and greatness of reality, we have to admit that the goal has always been and will always be to find the objective story. And in the modern era, we've sort of lost faith that there is a thing. But if you've come with me this far, if you've come with me far enough to see that a story is a morality, then you must be able to see also that if you believe in objective morality, you must therefore believe in an objective story. You might not know where it is, but you have to know that it's out there. Or you don't believe there's an objective morality. You throw that whole thing out the window. I think this is super exciting because the mere credible assertion that there is an objective story should light a fire under all of our rear ends to find out what it is, because that is an exciting and achievable quest. It's not a futile striving against this asymptotic barrier by which no man can pass. There is an objective story, and I have been deeply enriched by knowing what it is. And it's like a painting. It is a set of boundaries and stuff within, whereby you can dive in and always go deeper and not reach the end. It is a mystery in the sense of not being unknowable, but impossible to know fully. There is always a deeper beauty, like a fractal, to explore. And when you find the objective story, oh man, dive right in. It's no longer a mystical wishy-washy, well, it's sort of this and sort of that, but language can't describe it. No, language can describe it in pretty extraordinary extent. So I hope all of that has been as exciting for you as it is for me. One last time, if you believe in an objective morality, then you must believe there's an objective story. Let's go find it.